Hello and welcome back to our Teach Out series on concussions. I'm joined today by John Prose. He's a retired state of Michigan senator. Hello, John, and welcome. Thanks so much.
It's good to be here. Thanks
you for joining us.
And it's nice to talk about a really serious and important topic and give a little background on how I came to be a part of it in the legislative process. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So grew up in Southwest Michigan, the southwest corner of the state on Lake Michigan. Had the opportunity then to go on to Marquette University after finishing high school at a small Catholic school in Southwest Michigan, and then Michigan State University for a master's in education.
A Sparty.
A Sparty. For all of my friends that are U of M Wolverines, it's nice to be here on U of M's campus to talk about this important topic. Then spent about a decade working for Congressman Fred Upton of the southwest corner of the state, and got to learn a little bit what it was like to represent the people of Southwest Michigan, and that opened up the opportunity for me to think about whether or not service in public life would be worthwhile or whether it would be something that I would be good at doing. I don't know that I was ever good at it, but I certainly then had the opportunity to serve in the Michigan House for 3 2-year terms and then 2 4-year terms subsequently after that in the Michigan Senate. And really during that period of time had the good fortune of being able to work on really, really incredible topics, everything from rewriting our energy legislation to working on how we would fund the Department of Corrections and changing the way that we do criminal justice in Michigan, another really important topic. And of course this topic today as it relates to concussions and really what is it that we know about concussions and what don't we know. And as a parent of young athletes in 2011, that was one of the first bills that I introduced, which was to try to find a way to work towards legislation that would bring a greater awareness to moms and dads, to teachers and coaches, as well as the athletes themselves on how to manage this really unknown science area.
Thank you for your service. You mentioned a lot of legislative activity that you were part of. You know, if I think back as a fellow Michigander, 2011, we were just coming out of the Great Recession. We had a new governor with a full legislative agenda. What made you think this is the time to introduce concussion legislation?
Well, it certainly wasn't because it was the most important thing at the time. We had just a horrendous recovery after what was the worst, greatest recession that we could possibly ever encounter. I recall those days as literally a third of every home in the state was underwater or in foreclosure. Friends of mine during that 2010 election, I was on the ballot in 2010, I would help candidates and friends of mine in other parts of the state, and literally every third door had a sticker on it. It was a horrendous period of time. So I don't mean to minimize the importance of the tax reforms and the other work that we did to try to bring Michigan back into the fold as a state that was attractive for job growth, attractive for income growth, attractive for new and burgeoning industries to come and set roots in Michigan, and then to take care of those businesses and industries we already had. Fortunately, our agricultural industry in Southwest Michigan remained very strong through that period of time. But it struck me, though, too, that we can walk and chew gum in the legislative process. And at that point in time, I had 3 young children, all 3 of which were very active in athletics. And this discussion about concussions became more and more prevalent. And it struck me that each coach handled things differently. My children had no idea what it was about other than us having the conversation. I had the one benefit, I suppose, that my father was a family doctor in town. He's no longer with us, but in 2011 he was alive and offered some suggestions along the way on how to handle kids that are coming off the field, having been dinged, or saw stars or cobwebs or all the different phraseology that's used in this particular discussion. And it struck me that there was no protocol that anybody was responsible for. Parents, athletes, teachers, coaches. What if you've got an assistant coach that happens to just be assisting that day but isn't on the field for the game? Where is the protocol to manage this really uncertain area, knowing that the science was beginning to catch up to the injuries that were occurring? I recall as a kid, friends of mine, myself included, while I didn't play football, I'd had a few concussions along the way from even playing in the front yard, where I got hit by a kid and landed on my head and saw stars. Well, that by definition is some sort of a concussed situation. So the fact that there was nothing out there is what led me to believe that we needed to put something into place. And then came the legislative stories that we were able to tell. And the fact with legislation is that if you can tell a story, you can pass legislation that tries to solve a problem. And the problem was we did not have good education. And Michigan then became one of the national leaders in providing educational resources on today's current science, which even since 2011, 2012 is significantly different because of the amount of research that's been done.
That's right. That's right. So I can imagine, though, you must have garnered some allies to help you push this important area forward. So can you talk a little bit about some of the people you worked with? Maybe some allies emerged that you hadn't thought would show up to help you.
We started to research, myself and Rebecca O'Connell, who was my chief of staff at the time, and the both of us started to research what was existing out there in terms of concussions. I also happened to see one of the first Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel pieces on concussions in the NFL. And it struck me that the NFL had a really sincere interest in trying to solve that problem. Many people say differently. Many people say it's just such a big business, why would they care? I think they care. I think the NFL cares because it is so much a part of their industry. Right. And it's so much a part of their profit center then too. So how do you ensure that the good of the game can continue on if for some reason people are leaving the game? And even in my own youth sports activities, my son had zero interest in football, not because he couldn't play, but because he and his friends were choosing soccer or other sports where you can still get concussions, by the way.
Absolutely.
It's not just football or hockey. But interestingly, the NFL, I don't know if you've heard about the NFL, I'm sure. The NFL actually became an ally in this, and then the president of the Detroit Lions, Tom Lawand, became a close friend. And in that conversation, we were able to begin to have the NFL at the table testifying in favor of legislation in Michigan.
That's really terrific. Really, I'm sure had a huge impact on you telling the story, as you noted.
It did. And I recall one of the more poignant moments in testimony when we were telling the story was one of the football players who was on one of the state playoff teams in my region, one of my constituents. And he was at that point several years out of his high school football career and was continuing to suffer the effects of the trauma from multiple concussive situations, multiple hits, multiple times that he should have been pulled off the field and not played the next day by today's protocols. Back then, no protocols were in place. And the story that he tells is really one of a debilitating, this outward appearance, he's healthy, fit, just graduated from college, and he's still dealing with the headaches and the light sensitivities and all of the other physical ailments that have come because of those concussions and the fact that in the state playoffs, he played when he probably should not have played. If we'd had protocols in place, he would not have been in that situation, presuming everybody did what they were supposed to do.
Right, and now we have return to play requirements in Michigan that hopefully would stop that.
Right, and based upon science. So it's not an arbitrary decision by a coach. It's not an arbitrary decision by the Michigan High School Athletic Association. It's a defined series of protocols to follow. And once those protocols have been followed, then that student has the chance to get back on the practice field or the playing field. And that was the other thing too. It's not just playing in a game. It can happen in the gymnasium during PE class. It can happen in the middle of a practice and you wouldn't even know it, which is why it was important that the high school athletics, as well as our younger kid athletics, AYSO, soccer, and so forth, had the protocols in place to understand and give the best information on what concussions are, how to treat them, and how to recognize what's happening with a child.
I agree. Making sure that we can avoid the risk to concussion and return to play anywhere, really important. Now, you tell a compelling story about the potential for reducing repeat concussion, for example, with the return to play portion of the legislation. There must have still been detractors. Being a legislator isn't an easy job. So tell me what some of those concerns were on the other side of the aisle on this debate and how you dealt with that.
So the Michigan High School Athletic Association wasn't opposed. They didn't like being told what to do, bluntly. They're an independent body. It is not a legislatively appropriated body. They've come together on their own. It is not a part of the Department of Education or the Michigan High School or Michigan Education Association or anything like that. It's their own association designed to govern athletics and high school sports. Their concern at the time is that these mandates would be too burdensome,
Sure.
that the mandates would be too costly, and that the mandates themselves were not based upon sound science. All of which were reasonable and had to be solved in the way that we were going to implement the legislation through the Department of Health and Human Services, which required then also ensuring that there weren't penalties for failure to keep a kid from going back onto the field at the right time. How does the Michigan Medical Association provide background material and information? What do we rely upon as the science that we will accept versus science that we know is not well documented or well advised right now? So there was a lot of questions that had to be asked and answered in the legislative process. So while they were not opposed, they certainly weren't in support of, at least initially. There was some amongst the legislators who said there wasn't a problem. We were able to dispel that myth pretty quickly by providing case studies and simply asking them to ask their high school coaches in their districts who they represent.
Right. Talk to your constituents.
Talk to your constituents. I can promise you it's happening. And I can promise you there's some kid right now who went back to play, had another concussion, and is suffering from the effects of it right now in your district if you would ask. That certainly helped. The star power of the NFL helped.
Sure.
And then we had an interesting thing happening during that period of time. Politically, in that era, it was the rise of the Tea Party and concerns about privacy of information, medical privacy, HIPAA laws. Don't tell me what I'm supposed to do, and certainly don't look at anything that I have in my medical histories. You're not allowed to have any of that material information. So we had to solve in the legislation to ensure that this wasn't a matter of mining personal data.
Sure.
It was a matter of education and information. So you've pointed out what happens in legislative process. Anything and everything that can be a negative has to be solved in the conversation and solved in the legislative process. And so we did. We answered all of those questions and passed what, if I recall correctly, was near unanimous support out of the Michigan House and Senate, and then finally Governor Snyder's signature. And then over the next 6 months to 8 months, the Department of Health and Human Services began to implement the actual structure with which they would require our youth sports and our high school athletic sports to provide the up-to-date information about what is happening with concussions today.
Well, as the parent of two young athletes, I'm really grateful for all the work that you have done on this area to keep kids in youth sports safe. So thank you very much.
It's an honor to have worked on it, and I sure hope that it's kept the kids safe overall.
Okay, thank you so
You
much,
bet. Thank
John.
you.